Rohan had not worn the shirt in 3 years. It was a good shirt, a deep green button-down that he had bought on impulse, liked immediately, and then never worn, because the one time he had worn it to a friend's gathering, someone had made an offhand comment, "Nice shirt, didn't know you were into," that kind of thing. And something about the comment, delivered lightly, probably meant as nothing, had lodged itself in him and stayed. He had not worn the shirt since. It was not really about the shirt. The shirt was simply the most recent and most trackable example of a pattern that ran through nearly every visible decision in Rohan's life. He was 28 years old, and he had built an elaborate internal simulation running constantly in the background of his mind that modeled what other people were thinking about him at any given moment. Before he spoke in a meeting, the simulation ran predictions about how the comment would be received. Before he posted anything online, the simulation calculated the range of interpretations and quietly vetoed anything with too much variance. Before he chose what to wear, what to order, what music to admit he liked, what opinion to voice about a movie everyone else seemed to love, the simulation consulted an imagined panel of judges and adjusted accordingly. The panel was not real. He knew this intellectually, but it operated with the full force of something real, shaping his choices with a consistency that a genuine panel of judges would have struggled to match. He had wanted, at various points in his life, to learn to paint, to take an improv class, to grow a beard, to tell a joke in a meeting that might not land, to admit out loud that he liked a piece of music that was considered uncool by the people whose opinions he had, without ever deciding to, made central to his sense of himself. He had not done any of these things, not because he lacked the desire. The desire was consistently present, in fact, a quiet, persistent tug toward the things he actually wanted, running underneath the louder, more insistent voice that calculated exposure and consequence and the imagined reactions of a room he was usually not even in. His friend Zoe had known him since college and had, over the years, developed a habit of noticing the specific moments when Rohan's actual preference and his stated preference diverged. She caught one of these moments at a dinner in April. The group was discussing a film that had recently come out, one that critics had been divided on, but that had become, among their particular circle of friends, something close to a consensus dislike. Everyone at the table had said some version of it wasn't very good. Rohan had genuinely loved the film. He had watched it twice. He had thought about it for days afterward, in the specific way that art occasionally embeds itself and will not leave. When the conversation turned to him, he said, "Yeah, I thought it was pretty overrated too." Zoe looked at him. She had watched the film with him 3 weeks earlier at his apartment. She remembered clearly what he had said afterward. Something about how it was one of the best things he had seen in years. She did not say anything at the table, but later, walking to the subway, she asked him about it. "You said you loved that movie," she said, "when we watched it together. You said it was one of the best things you'd seen in years." Rohan felt caught in the specific uncomfortable way of being caught in something he had not fully registered as a lie because it had felt, in the moment, like the obviously correct thing to say. "I don't know," he said. "I guess I didn't want to be the only one who liked it." Zoe was quiet for a moment. She said, "Rohan, how often do you do that?" He did not answer immediately. She said, "I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm actually asking. How often do you say what you think other people want to hear instead of what you actually think?" He thought about the shirt. He thought about the improv class he had wanted to take for 2 years and had not signed up for because he had imagined, in vivid and unhelpful detail, being bad at it in front of strangers. He thought about the joke he had thought of in a meeting the previous week, a genuinely funny observation that he had decided not to say because he had run the simulation, and the simulation had returned a result of possible risk with no clear reward. "More than I realized until right now," he said. They walked in silence for a moment. Zoe said, "Can I tell you something my grandmother used to say?" It's from an old story. I think it's originally from somewhere in South Asia, though I've heard versions of it elsewhere too." He nodded. She said, "There was a peacock in the forest, famous among all the animals for his dance. When he danced, alone, in a clearing at dawn, before any other creature was awake, he moved with a kind of freedom and beauty that seemed to come from somewhere beyond himself. The other animals, who occasionally woke early enough to see it, said it was the most extraordinary thing in the forest. One day, word of the dance spread, and animals began gathering deliberately to watch. The peacock noticed the audience, and the moment he noticed them, something changed. He began to think about how his movements looked. He began adjusting, mid-dance, based on which movements seemed to draw appreciative sounds from the watching animals and which did not. He began performing the dance rather than dancing it, and the dance got worse. Not dramatically, but the animals who had seen both versions noticed. The early morning dance, danced for no one, had a quality the audience dance did not have. Something had been lost in the noticing. The peacock, sensing the animals were less moved than before, tried harder. He added movements he thought would impress. He removed movements he worried looked strange. He became, increasingly, a performer of what he imagined the audience wanted, rather than an expression of what actually moved through him. Eventually, he could not remember how to dance the way he had danced before anyone was watching. He had performed his way out of his own dance. Rohan was quiet for a long moment after Zoe finished the story. He said, "I think I stopped dancing a long time ago." Zoe said, "I think so too, but I think the dance is still in there. You just have to find a clearing early enough that no one's watching." He thought about this for weeks afterward. He thought about it specifically one Sunday morning, alone in his apartment, when he found himself, almost by accident, doing something he had not done in years. He put on music, not the music he would have chosen if he thought anyone might hear it, the music he actually loved. The slightly uncool, slightly earnest music that had meant something to him since he was a teenager, and that he had quietly stopped mentioning to anyone because it did not fit the version of himself he had constructed for other people. He listened to it, loudly, alone, with no simulation running because there was no audience to run it for. He felt something in his chest that he recognized, distantly, as the thing he used to feel before he had learned to perform. He thought about the shirt. The following week, he wore it, not to a large gathering, just to a small dinner with Zoe and 2 other friends, a lower stakes test than the original wearing had been. Nobody said anything about it. Nobody noticed, or if they noticed, nobody found it noteworthy enough to comment on, which was itself a small revelation. The comment 3 years ago had apparently mattered so much more to him than it had to anyone else, including, quite possibly, the person who made it. He signed up for the improv class the following month. He was, predictably, not very good at it in the beginning. He said the wrong thing in a scene during his second class, and the scene fell apart, and everyone laughed, not unkindly, and he felt the old simulation fire up immediately, calculating the damage, preparing the retreat. But he stayed in the room. He tried the next scene. It went slightly better. He began to notice something over the following weeks, showing up to a room full of strangers who were also learning, also occasionally failing, also visibly not performing a polished version of themselves, but simply trying things and seeing what happened. There was a specific relief in being in a room that was explicitly, structurally, about being imperfect in public. He started, very slowly, to say the true thing more often than the safe thing, in small ways. First, an honest opinion about a restaurant, a genuine reaction to a piece of news rather than the reaction he calculated would land best. The joke in the meeting, the following month, that he had held back weeks before. He said a version of it, tentatively, and it landed, and the small win reinforced something that felt important. He did not become a person entirely free of the internal panel. He suspected, based on what he had read and what people further along this path than him described, that the panel never fully disappeared. Some version of social awareness was healthy, even necessary. It was not the goal to become someone who did not care at all what impact his words had on others. But the panel's power over him diminished. Its verdict became one input among several rather than the deciding vote on every choice he made. He thought often about the peacock, about the dance that existed before the audience arrived, and the specific quality that got lost the moment performing replaced doing. He began looking for his own early morning clearings, the moments, however small, where he could do the thing simply because it was true for him, without first submitting it to the imagined panel for a verdict. The green shirt became, eventually, just a shirt he wore sometimes, without a story attached to it. The dance, slowly, began to come back, not perfectly, not entirely, but enough that when he moved through the world now, more of what people saw was actually him, dancing. Rather than performing the idea of a dance he imagined they wanted to see,